All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Grail Country. I'm here with Evgeny Tarakin and his wife, Ina. And we've decided to dig into the story of Cosmo. I think you and I, Evgeny, we were talking about it and both agreed that we couldn't figure it out.
No. it's still magical.
It was a really magical story. And then you shared with me that your wife also loves the story, and so she's joining us tonight. I'm excited to dig in. So, how about first thoughts? Anybody?
Well, mirrors is my first thought.
Okay.
Well, I really, really love the way he described mirrors. Like basically that when you look at something in the mirror, it becomes enchanting. It becomes enchanted as opposed to when you see it face to face in the ordinary life.
Right.
And it really resonated with me because a story is like a mirror. Like the Lord of the Rings is a story. And when you see the same events in your own life, in everyday life, you don't necessarily find them extraordinary. But when you read about the same things in a story, somehow, as they are reflected by the author's mind, they become maybe you are enchanted. Maybe it's just the story becomes enchanted, but something changes when it's mirrored back to you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I remember that section of the story where he talked about that. That was actually kind of haunting because he wishes he could enter into it. Remember, he's looking at the mirror and he's looking into his room, and the room is framed by the mirror frame, and I don't know where it is now, but there he says unknown. And yet I know every bone, every joint in the skeleton in the corner, right? And that old battle axe looks as if any moment it might be caught up by a mailed hand and borne forth by the mighty arm, go crashing through casque and skull and brain, invading the unknown with yet another bewildered ghost. I should like to live in that room if only I could get into it. You know? And then scarcely had the half-molded words floated from him as he stood gazing into the mirror. He saw something, right? Glide suddenly in, like he had like a glimpse of something in the mirror. And I noticed that with George MacDonald. As soon as all you have to do is slightly express a desire towards that thing, like the enchantment, and it's there for you, right? Like it very quickly becomes available to you. And I think he does it in Lilith and I don't know about Phantastes, but he does it in Lilith, where in that scene where he leans in to see the raven closer, because the raven goes into the mirror and then he can see a landscape in the mirror, and he leans, and he falls into that new land, right? Into that enchanted place. So like it's almost involuntary at a certain point. Right? Once you've expressed that desire or curiosity, you almost have no more choice about what's going to happen next, which I think is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Ina? What about first thoughts?
Yeah, I think yeah, the mirror is definitely a like central part of the story. And a couple of chapters before this story in the book, he says this phrase, all mirrors are magic mirrors.
Right.
So, and he was at that point, he was in a boat. I believe he was just gliding on some river, and he looked in the reflection in the water, and he felt like everything was different in water, and
Yeah.
he says all mirrors are magic mirrors, and then he goes to this story in a couple of chapters. Yes, so it's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, that's also a good point about where he was previously. I didn't mention it when I did the reading, but he's at the fairy. I mean, I did say he was at the fairy castle, and he found the story in a fairy book, in a magical book, in this magical castle, in a magical library, right? And but it's also where he finds his shadow. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, it's not the character of the story we're talking about that finds the shadow. It's the actual character reading the story that finds his shadow.
Mm-hmm. But then at the beginning of the Cosmo chapter 13, Anodus, who is the guy reading the book,
yeah,
he basically says that the enchanting book was so enchanting, so magical that once you start reading it, you are in the story immediately. So
yeah,
he said, I felt like it was me. I was this and that, and I was Cosmo as well.
hmm
And I think it also bears on the meaning of the of Cosmo story. I think this whole Cosmo story was given to him on purpose, based
yeah,
on what I know about what's going to happen to Onotis later. It's just it started to compute in my mind
yeah,
what might be the reason why he was given this story in the first place.
yeah. And why we are given the story. I mean, it
We are
just kind
given
of,
the story.
yeah, like it's plunked in them in the middle. And I remember hearing, I can't remember, I never remember this woman's name. She's a well-known MacDonald scholar. I think her first name is, it's either Kirsten or Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
She gives, there's lectures on YouTube from her. But she mentions the perplexing aspect of the story being a story within a story that seems somewhat disconnected. And I guess it's been a subject of discussion with MacDonald scholars, you know. So we're not the only people who are like, what does it mean?
Well, maybe the story of Cosmo was given to him as a mirror,
Oh,
to
like
see
that.
what's going on with him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And there's another thing about libraries and enchanted books, and I've always got the sense, I can't remember right offhand what story or what book, other MacDonald book I read that I noticed this theme in, but I've often wondered if this is for him what it's like to read the Bible, like if the Bible is the fairy castle, you know, if the Bible is the library, right? And then, you know, it narrows into these specific stories where it feels like him or us, right? And that for him, reading scripture is like reading an enchanted fairy story in an enchanted fairy castle.
interesting.
You know? Yeah, I've wondered about that. Well, one of the things I recently took a course with Michael Martin, and we read Hymns of the Night by Novalis, and George MacDonald translated Hymns of the most common translation out there is the one that George MacDonald translated. And he was quite taken with Novalis. And when I reread Cosmo the other day, it jumped out at me all the references to the night, actually. Have you ever read Hymns of the Night?
No, I mean the only, I think I've only heard about Novalis from MacDonald and C.S. Lewis,
Right.
just in references, but I've not read him.
Okay.
So.
Because I just, out of curiosity, I went through the story a little bit, and not to drag on too long about this, but I marked some pages here. So at the beginning of the story, it says, one afternoon towards dusk, he was wandering dreamily in one of the principal streets, and that's where he meets his friend, and they go into the shop, and he ends up getting the mirror, right? So it's towards evening, it's towards dusk that they meet. And then another reference is, and when I started looking for it, I realized how intentional this is.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's at the beginning of a paragraph. Every night, about the same time, the lady entered. Every night. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one. One evening, as he stood gazing on his treasure, he thought he saw a faint expression of self-consciousness on her countenance. Again, in the evening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that scene where he does the incantation to get her out of the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
He describes it, that opening chapter, it says, "It was a sultry evening. The air was full of thunder. A sense of luxurious depression filled the brain." So it's also in an evening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when he's looking for von Steinwald, it says, "At length one evening, as he was passing the house of von Steinwald, he saw the windows more than usually brilliant." And the last one is the second last paragraph. "When Lisa came up, she found her mistress kneeling above a wan, dead face, which smiled on in the spectral moonbeams." So, yeah, there's this whole feeling of night and darkness and evening and right dusk, and so it's kind of dark. And then I just had a quick look at Hymns to the Night, and here's a couple things that I pulled out of it. This is from Novalis, and it begins this way: "What springs up all at once so sweetly boding in my heart and stills the soft air of sadness? Dost thou also take a pleasure in us, dark night? What holdest thou under thy mantle that with hidden power affects my soul? Precious balm drips from thy hand out of its bundle of poppies. Thou upliftest the heavy laden wings of the soul." What's interesting about Hymns of the Night is he's actually framing it in a very feminine. It's a very experience, right? Which is exactly what's happening in Cosmo's story. So there's another one here. "More heavenly than those glittering stars, we hold the eternal eyes which the night has opened within us. Farther they see than the palest of those countless hosts, needing no aid from the light. They penetrate the depths of a loving soul that fills a loftier region with bliss ineffable. Glory to the Queen of the world, to the great prophet of the holier worlds, to the guardian of blissful love. She sends thee to me, thou tenderly beloved, the gracious son of the night. Now am I awake, for now am I thine and mine. Thou hast made me know the night, and brought her to me to be my life. Thou hast made of me a man. Consume my body with the ardor of my soul, that I turned to finer air may mingle more closely with thee, and then our bridal night endure forever." That's from Novalis. And then the last one that I have here is, "Must the morning always return? Will the despotism of the earthly never cease? Unholy activity consumes the angel visit of the night. Will the time never come when love's hidden sacrifice shall burn eternally? To the light a season was set, but everlasting and boundless is the dominion of the night. Endless is the duration of sleep. Holy sleep, gladden not too seldom in this earthly day labor, the devoted servant of the night. Fools alone mistake thee, knowing not of sleep, but the shadow which, in the twilight of the real night, thou pitifully castest over us. They know not that it is thou who hauntest the bosom of the tender maiden, and makest a heaven of her lap. Never suspect it is thou, opening the doors to heaven, that steppest to meet them out of ancient stories, bearing the key to the dwellings of the blessed silent messenger of secrets infinite."
Mm.
I just really heard reverberations. Like it's like he's almost like he's telling the hymns of the night in a fairy tale.
Yeah. Well.
You know?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and and I were just discussing the other day that in Genesis 1, when God creates the heavens of the earth, and when it talks about the days, the creation of the days, like it always says it was evening, and then it was morning, day one. So the day starts with the evening,
Yes.
and then obviously night, day dawns. Okay, I have to turn off.
I can't hear you for some reason.
Yeah, your microphone is not working.
I'm trying to.
There we go.
I got
Okay.
an incoming call. I'll just reconnect my earphones.
Mhm.
Can you
We
hear
hear
me?
you. We hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll
So
turn off my camera. Zhenya, just a moment. I'll turn off my camera. I'll try to change a room because this room is very stuffy. It's too hot. I'll try to
all right,
change
go
the
ahead.
room.
Yes,
So
go ahead.
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
I'll still be hearing.
Okay. Sounds
Mhm.
good.
Yeah. So basically, I was trying to say is that it's an interesting progression from evening to the day, and what you were now reading from Novalis, and as an introduction to the the sequence of nights in the story. It's also
Yeah.
kind of telling. It's telling because um, it makes me think that like everything starts from nothing.
Right.
Like nothing. The divine bosom, the divine womb, is the place of nothing, and then something appears out of nothing, and light appears in the darkness, and
Right.
it flickers, and yet, the thing we were discussing is that it's not spiritual night that the author of Genesis is speaking about. It's not the kind of darkness that is opposed or juxtaposed to light, but they like in those 7 days of creation, night and day are one, basically, because it's basically like the darkness of the womb, and something gets
Right.
born in the womb, and it's not spiritual darkness came later in chapter 3,
Mhm.
and so basically God is always covered, is always hidden under some cloak of darkness,
Right.
and it's in that cloak of darkness that we see him shine the brightest. So
That's
anyway,
beautiful.
just a thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting about Hymns to the Night by Novalis is that he was engaged, and his fiance died of tuberculosis.
Mm.
And he died, I think, 7 months later.
Mm.
It was just, I think Novalis was only like 28 years old when he died. And so it's it's kind of a Dante-esque,
Yeah.
moving through the darkness and, mourning the loss of this woman in his life. And there's something very akin to that in the story of Cosmo, I find. Right? This deep desire, this longing to be close to her, and yet they're separated in the end by death, right? So anyway, yeah, I thought that was interesting. Ina, your husband, he said you had a groundbreaking revelation about about the story, and I'm dying to hear it.
I wouldn't
Well,
say that.
I was mentioning, I
What did you
mentioned
mean?
that you came up with the idea of what actually happened, why Cosmo died, and what was the
Oh,
source of that
there are,
wound in his side. And I thought
yeah.
it was pretty interesting because I didn't think of that.
Oh, it just, yeah, there could be several reasons to that. Maybe Sherry, you have your ideas.
I
I
have
just
no
thought that,
idea.
oh, okay.
No idea. Yeah.
Because
So
when
that's
she
why.
met him, yeah, when she met him on the bridge, he was wounded.
Right.
And I just thought that maybe when he, so he, as I understand the story, he gets into the house of that person that has the mirror, and he actually breaks the mirror in his house. So I thought perhaps that person wounded him because he broke his precious mirror.
Yeah.
So that could be just one reason why he was wounded. Another thought was that it might be a piece of the glass that broke off and wounded him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yeah,
not
my
something
thought,
grand, just
Okay. Okay.
yeah, I think it's just very interesting that, you know, it could be that guy who had the mirror
Mhm.
that wounded him, or it could be really the mirror itself,
Mhm.
because the mirror was cursed, and you know the lady was asking him to break the
To
mirror
smash.
and break the curse, and so somehow, I mean, if you really sacrifice, you will pay the price.
Mm-hmm.
So the mirror itself, the curse itself, could have done that, or
Yeah.
or this guy could have done that.
It's funny, because the first time I read it was a long time ago. And then when I read it the second time, I realized that, see, everybody has a, okay, so she didn't meet him on the bridge. She walked by and he came out of the side and called to her. That's how I saw it. Yeah, that's right. So I remember thinking it was von Steinwald because they were both good swordsmen, remember? He was giving
Hmm.
lessons, and
Mhm.
von Steinwald was apparently really, arrogant kind of guy. And so I assumed that when the mirror went missing from his place, because for a time he was depressed because he didn't know where the mirror was. He had to find it.
Mhm.
And somebody took it from him because he was going to smash it, but then someone came and took it. I think it was the old guy in the antique shop that came and took it. Because
I'm sorry, you mean took the mirror?
who took the mirror. Yeah, and then resold it to someone else because
Mhm.
remember in the very beginning of the story when Cosmo left with it, he first of all wanted to carry it for him.
Mhm.
And Cosmo didn't like anyone to know where he lived.
Mhm.
And then he felt like he was being followed, but he couldn't see anyone.
Mhm.
And then the other part of that was that that little guy in the antique shop said something about, well, that's the 8th guy that's taken that mirror. We'll see how the lady fares, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So here's a question I have. Who do you think that guy is, that antique shop owner?
Well, I had another idea about that. Why don't you
Actually
share?
discussed it.
What?
Can you hear me now? I just unplugged
Yeah.
my headphones.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We discussed it today, me and Eugene, and I had an idea that this guy who was owning the shop, this guy might be the same lady actually who put the curse on her, because at one point he mentions that when he looked at him, he couldn't say if he was a man or a woman.
Right.
And
Hmm.
yeah, somewhere he says that. Yeah, okay, it's here. He felt a kind of repugnance to him, mingled with a strange feeling of doubt whether a man or a woman stood before him.
Right.
So this person who was selling the mirror, he couldn't even say if it was a man or a woman. So it might be as well that lady who put the curse on the girl in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I actually remembered that too.
And yeah, and I just had a thought that this person might not like physically taken the mirror from the Cosmos room. I think it was all magic.
Yeah,
Because
this is what KL
Yeah.
says too. I think there was a protective spell on the mirror. Insurance spell.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I also think it might be the part of the like the deal that he made with the this person who sold the mirror, because when he
Right.
sold it, he gave him so where is it? Yeah, he gave him this condition. He said, if you should ever want to get rid of it again, you will let me have the first offer.
Right.
And Cosmo said, certainly. And he said, on your honor? And Cosmo said, on my honor. So I guess it was probably part of the spell that he wanted to get rid of that mirror at that point. And that meant mirror goes back to the shop.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's perfect. That makes sense. Yeah. So dare we spiritualize the story? Like, one of the things that stood out to me about that story that I found really personally affecting was the fact that the woman in the mirror could sense his presence by the kindnesses that he afforded himself. Like he started to refurbish his room so that she would be more comfortable.
Mhm.
And I thought that was such an interesting framing of sensing a presence that you can't see, for example, you know? And I wondered how much of a Christ figure Cosmo is, because he's caring for her and loving her, and he can see her, but she can't see him, right? And I don't know about you, but it feels
I
like
think
that sometimes.
I think this is a really interesting point that you're making, Sherry. That there's a barrier between them. He wants to get to her, he can't.
Yeah.
She can't get to him either because of this curse. And I think there's an interesting development to Cosmo's passion, because when at the beginning of the story he seems to be enveloped by the how would I put this, by this darkness, so to say, by the feminine charms. He is enveloped and he is led on, and then he finds the mirror, and he finds this lady in the mirror, and then he has this passion that's kindled in him immediately.
Right.
And all he can think about from that point on is how to break that barrier and get her, get her to come to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so this passion eventually grows so big that he uses magic, basically, like, I don't know if it's black magic, but some sort of incantation
Yeah.
to get her out. And he succeeds. She comes to him. But then there's a breaking point in his development where he says to her, "I love you," and she explains to him that she's under the spell and she's suffering because of this mirror. But and then she says basically, can you destroy it for me? But I might not come back. You might not see me again.
Yeah, that's a really
And
good part. Yeah.
and that's like a test. Does
Yeah.
he truly love her? And when I read that, I was kind of like, George MacDonald does a very good job of explaining of how he felt, because his whole passion, Cosmo's whole passion is to have her there, and she's there.
Yeah.
At least she could. I mean, he could, if he loved her with possessive love, he wouldn't have even attempted to break the
Yeah.
mirror.
Yeah, and he actually says there, because he has a moment where he goes, "Oh man, I don't know, she's here right now, and I can look at her,"
Mhm.
and then he says, she says, "Oh, he loves me not. He loves me not, even as I love him. And alas, I care more for his love than even for the freedom I ask," which is an interesting line. And then he realized that wakes him up in a way, and he says, "I will not wait to be willing." And then he tries to destroy the mirror.
Mhm.
And
I will not wait to be willing. That's a good one.
yeah, because you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of when Christ said, "If it's your will, let this cup pass from me," right?
Mhm.
Like he didn't really want to. He didn't really want to go to the cross, right? In the Garden of Gethsemane, he was sweating, like he was doing the Cosmo thing without sinning, of course. But and when Cosmo says, "I will not wait to be willing," it just reminded me of that, of Jesus
Mhm.
saying, "Not my will, but yours," right? Be done. That's what
Mhm.
that's speaking of. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
also,
definitely. Go ahead.
yeah, I also remembered one verse that I was reading lately after you, Sherry, mentioned that the lady could feel his presence by the way he took care of the room,
Yeah.
and he actually took care of her by taking care of the room, and she
Right.
could feel his love and his care through that. So I was reading this verse lately. It's in Acts 14, verses are 16 and 17. They go like this: "In the past, he let all nations go their own way. Yet he has not left them, yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their season. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your heart with joy."
Right.
So I just thought it's this kind of the same way. So God didn't like reveal himself like very clearly to many peoples, but at the same time he didn't leave them without testimony by taking care of them, by
Right.
actually by doing something good to them. So it was
Mhm.
testimony of God. And the same was like it was testimony of Cosma,
Yeah.
how he took care of her through doing these small acts of kindness.
Right. Right. Exactly that. That's right. Yeah. And I found that very touching because yeah, there's a couple of elements to that on her side of the thing. Like first of all, she has to notice, right? Oftentimes she comes in the room and she's emotionally distressed or she's not well or I don't know, she's got things going on obviously, right? And in the story, he makes the point a few times that she suddenly notices something. Like she has to make that a concerted effort to notice the skeleton is gone, for example. That was one of them. I remember that. Because the first time she came in the room, the skeleton was there and it frightened her. And as soon as she left, he moved the skeleton right away. Right. He's like, "Oh, that's terrible. That looks terrible in there." And and then the next time she came, she noticed it was gone. And that was interesting. But she has to notice, like the verses you read, Ina, we have to notice that the rain comes and right
Mhm.
um and the harvest comes at the right time and
Yeah.
and that it's a gift, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Mm.
hang on a second. Yeah.
What's interesting to me also is that it seems to go parallel to Anodys's story as well, because if you remember at the beginning of the book, he gets into the fairyland, and he starts walking around, and he releases this marble lady, but she
Yeah.
runs away.
Yeah. I was thinking about
But he is, and then he's overcome by passion, and he is trying to get to her in any way, like by any means possible.
Yeah.
Just like Cosmo is trying his best, of course, and then eventually he uses this incantation and magic. So Anodys is really overcome by passion. I think the reason he discovers this shadow in the same palace eventually is because he's not yet at the point where he can love without being possessive.
Right.
And
Okay.
and that's why he finds his shadow. So
Yeah, and he
so
finds the
this
shadow by disobeying, right? Because he's
yeah.
not supposed to go in that room. He goes in there and he comes out with it.
Yes.
So it's the
So
disobedience that it attaches itself to somehow. Yeah.
so the story of Cosmo could well have been a mirror given to him, by God or higher powers in the castle, who were guiding him
Right.
to basically give him another warning. Don't go that way, because you're going to lose what you really, really love, by doing that. But then he goes a long, long way. Basically, like like Israelites wandering in the desert. He goes in circles until he finds his purpose, and
Right.
basically repeats Cosmos, feat, heroic feat at the end.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of that theme. There's a lot of theme also of in George MacDonald's stories of untransformed women or women who need to be transformed, which is, I think, his image for the bride of Christ, right? So, and he takes that from the story. I mean, one of the more common stories in the Hebrew scriptures is the book of Hosea, right? Where Hosea has to marry the prostitute, and he has to keep taking her back. Kind of like God's like, this is how I feel.
Oh wow!
But that was one of the things that became really apparent to me when I was reading Lilith. George MacDonald sprinkles all throughout that story. He sprinkles descriptions of what Lilith is wearing, how she. One of the things that Lilith keeps for herself is the waters. I don't know if you remember that in Lilith.
I've not read it.
Oh, you haven't read Lilith? Oh, I shouldn't say anything then. Darn it! I'm gonna spoil it for you.
To read it.
You did?
We have to read it.
I need to read it.
Oh yeah, it's so good. It like, to me, Phantastes is like, it's like a run up to Lilith, and Lilith is not as long, but it's very like rich, and very dense in that way. I mean, with just packed with information. But yeah. Anything else stand out to you guys? Anything in particular that you didn't understand? That was just totally yeah.
I did. I mean, I thought a little more about just the whole idea of mirrors in general, because it's interesting, because at the beginning he kind of says, well, he says about mirrors that basically whatever you see in the mirror becomes enchanted. So it's like a positive aspect of looking at yourself through a mirror, or looking at your life through a mirror. But at the same time, it was the mirror that was cursed, and that caused a lot of suffering. This lady, a lot of suffering.
Right.
So the mirror seems to be like a double-edged thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's like it has the capacity for narcissism or something like that.
Yes, and I think at the beginning, how would they put this? Like when I look in the mirror at myself, all I see is an appearance, and I can pretty much, how would I say that? If I stop at that level and I equate who I am with what I see, I will be mistaken, because I am not what I am externally. And so in that case, if I make this mistake, I turn my external appearance into an idol, because I don't see anything else in me that meets the eye. And so that was pretty much what Cosmo was taken up with, because at first he saw her appearance, and he basically, had that passion for her, and that passion led him to experience this possessive love, up to a point where he almost, like he had to use this, I'm not sure if it's black magic, but it was really like forbidden arts to get her out. And it shows the degree of passion. But then something happens, and he is able to let her go, like let the appearance go, because he loves her, not just her appearance.
Yeah.
And in that moment, the curse of the mirror is broken. So it's kind of parallel to what we all experience in our lives, like when we equate who we are with how we look, or what we have acquired, or what we have amassed, like accumulated externally. Well, we basically create idols,
Right.
and we refuse to pierce the image that we see in the mirror with the imagination. And when Owen Barfield said, basically, when we refuse to pierce images with the imagination, we create idols, and all idols become curses.
Wow.
And that's why the mirror is this double-edged thing. It flips depending on what I'm prepared to see.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah. So there's the potential to look in the mirror and see your true self, or to see your false self too, in a way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
If I go beyond what meets the eye, then I have the potential.
And I think it's key what you said about piercing, because that's exactly what happens in his stories.
He's pierced.
They go through the mirrors. Like
all
his characters, they pierce the mirror. Actually, they go through them. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a portal, and not just a hard thing that you can't get through. In a sense, it's interesting because there's some other authors coming to my mind at the moment. Douglas Harding, he talks about looking in a mirror at a certain stage of development in your life. He calls it the teenager phase. And that's when you look in the mirror and believe that that's who you really are. Like that's it. Right. And he contrasts that to the toddler stage, when the toddler, his parents will say, "Look, that's you, Bobby," and the little kid will look and say, "Okay, for your sake, I'll say yes, that's me." But that's never me to the child. The child is in you would understand this in Barfield's language. The child is in that mode of original participation, where he's everything. He's the whole world, right? He's the sky, he's the butterfly, he's the dinosaur, he's the truck, he's the cow, he's everything. He can be everything. But the teenager looks in the mirror and says, "That's who I am," right? And then Douglas Harding says that at that point, he said, "No wonder they're so angry, because their world goes from this to this," right? And I've always loved that. Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah. And so, Douglas Harding sent the manuscript to his book to C.S. Lewis, but I don't know how much he knew about Owen Barfield. But he he basically says that the end stage of development for a human being is the sage, and the sage marries the child back to the older person, right? So the older person can actually, in wisdom, participate in an original participation kind of way. But he believes that most people stay in the teenager phase, and they just think that they are what. And he says, you are not what you look like. What you look like is death, but what you are is not. Right?
Mhm.
Yeah. I'll have to send you that. I'll send you that clip, Eugene.
Yeah,
You can
please
see
do.
it.
Please do. Yeah.
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 And then there was another thought that came to my mind about mirrors, but I lost it. Anyway, I might think of it later.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. I was talking to a friend of mine, Josef, who is an Orthodox Jew, and he was explaining to me this same principle in when they built, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was the tabernacle or the temple now, but Moses didn't want them to use the women to use mirrors. I guess the Pharaoh didn't like it either, because he felt that they got too caught up in who they, in their looks or something. But and then Moses took that a step further and tried to banish them altogether. But God told him, and I don't have references for this, sorry, but he did give me scriptural references. But God told them to make the basins that they wash their hands in before they go in, their purification ritual, out of the mirrors, so that they could learn to look in, like through the water. Think about this. Through the water into the mirror to see who they already, it's kind of like Heidegger's already not yet, right? Your true self, to understand that. And that came to my mind too while you were talking, Eugene, that thing that my friend shared with me recently.
So basically, when they looked in the water in the basin, they could kind of pierce that
Well, they
thing.
could see through. Yeah, they could see through the mirror. And according to him, and I can send you what he wrote to me about that and sent me about that, because it's really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I will. Yeah. The object of it was to actually be able to look at yourself and see who you really are, And Douglas Harding uses that. Douglas Harding probably doesn't know much about that, but he also uses that term of who you really, really are. Who you really,
really are. Well, I was going to say that Ina and I just discussed this. Ina is following this Ukrainian philosopher Alexander Salonik as well, and well, I'm really tempted to share that, even though it's really tied closely to the Russian language. What I'm trying to say, his philosophy is so tied up to the language, just like Heidegger's. It's tied up to the German language, and so the translators really struggle to really capture his meaning of Dasein in English and in Russian. So there's like all kinds of things. So, believe it or not, okay, in Russian, the words for face as like the external face, right? And then the word for your inner essence. That's okay. we just had a cold for a week.
Yeah, I know. It's been going around. A lot of people have it.
Yeah. Anyway, so the word for face and the word for your who you are, the inner essence, and the word for the how to put this, like the all of the saints in the that ever lived in the world and that are in heaven is one word, lik.
Yeah.
So basically, so lik is when I say the word lik, which it means face, and then who I am inside my essence, and
Ooh.
also who I am in the gathering of the saints.
Oh my
But
goodness.
there's a fourth semantic meaning to lik, and it's part of the word likavania, which means rejoicing. When he puts this together, it's basically like this. You only know who you really are inside you when other people that you're with, other saints, look at your face as the external face, pierce it, and see who you are when you are rejoicing.
Oh wow.
And everything that I said is just one word in Russian. One
Yeah.
word. Except that, it's in one case it's a noun, and then in other instance it's a verb. So, but it's like an interplay
That is
of meanings
amazing.
within one word. And I'm not doing justice to it, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is.
so basically, when other people see me rejoicing, like Sophia was rejoicing before the face of the Lord, they reveal to me who I really am by piercing my
Your face.
face. So that's just mind-blowing.
Wow. Well, I mean, this has really been a thing for me, faces, because George MacDonald is it this book, Phantastes, where he meets, I always get Lilith and Phantastes mixed up, where he meets all the skeletons in the ballroom.
Not the skeletons. He meets the statues.
Okay, so it's in Lilith that he meets skeletons in the ballroom. And in that scene, he talks about how long must they endure their facelessness, right? I don't want to get into it because you guys haven't read it yet, so I don't want to spill the beans. But he basically says something like, until they have faces, and that's where Lewis gets the until we have faces, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Douglas Harding, his whole thing is headlessness. So he says that, we can, if we didn't have screens or mirrors, we point at something and I can see my finger and I can see the thing I'm pointing at the same time. But if I point at myself, I can only see my finger. I can't see the thing I'm pointing at. Right. So for that reason, I don't have a head. The only way I can see myself is in the face of the other person.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right. And then there's lots of psychological research on how an infant develops its personality based on how it sees itself in the face of its mother. Right. That it can't become anything. And they actually suffer terrible psychological damage if the mother doesn't make eye contact with them.
Yes.
Right. And so, what you're saying there is so good. I love it.
So interesting that in Lewis's Paralandra, the one thing that this devil character Weston is, he was possessed by this no man that Lewis calls him no man.
Mm-hmm.
One thing he does to tempt this Eve of Paralandra world is to give her a mirror. So basically, she's already had a mirror. First of all, Maleldil is her mirror, and her husband is her mirror. But then he gives her this actually physical mirror, so she could start looking at herself separately, as if she could point at herself and say, "Oh, this is who I am,"
right?
Which is which is wrong. And also in the book of Enoch, those evil angels, the fallen angels, supposedly come down on earth and teach humans forbidden arts, and one of those arts was mirrors as well.
Right.
And so basically the idea is that when you stop looking at yourself through the loving gaze of other people who love you and God, you will eventually find like Narcissus found his mirror,
Right.
and then you will wither away basically by
Right.
looking at yourself all the time.
Right. But then there's this other idea that you can pierce the mirror, like Barfield talks about, right? And
you can go through, yeah.
and you can go through the mirror. Yeah. You got any thoughts, Ina?
Yeah, not about this. I'm just listening. I'm still thinking about the book, and yeah, I didn't like it that Cosmo had to die at the end. Yeah, but at the same time, I was thinking,
Say it again, because
probably,
you got frozen for a moment.
Yeah, for a moment.
What didn't you like?
oh, I didn't like it that Cosmo had to die in the book.
Uh,
I didn't.
Yeah, but at the same time, I was thinking perhaps to break a curse, you have to die, you have to sacrifice. So I don't know what MacDonald thought about it. Yeah, I would wish he would have to die, but it looks like he had to actually break the curse.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that he dies of a wound to the side, because there is a sociological tie-in to that piercing by the spear. I think Bulgakov talks about it as the earth itself, as the grail, as the cup, right, for the blood and the water that comes from Christ's side. It's also a birthing metaphor, because blood and water is present at birth, right? And there's the idea that the lamb was slain before the foundation of the world. In other words, creation happens at the cross, right? So yeah, there's all kinds of things going on there with the wound to the side. And that's why I often wonder how analogous Cosmo is to Christ, because he wants to free the bride who can't see him, and he doesn't wait to be willing, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? He doesn't wait until he just says, God's will be done, right? Not mine. And so he doesn't wait to be willing. Like, there's all these little, I love how George MacDonald peppers all these little theological truths throughout his stories. They're just amazing. Yeah. 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 Well,
now I have to keep reading, because it's been a while since I read the whole story. I mean, the whole book.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
So
yeah. I think the last time we talked, I mentioned to you that when Anodos actually leaves for Fairyland, he heads south. Remember that? He goes off the path, and he heads south. And I've heard Phantastes described as a coming of age book, because he's a young man.
He's 21, right?
He's 21. Yeah. And he's just inherited the estate. His father's passed, and yeah, he's going from childhood into manhood, and he's obviously making tons of mistakes, as we do. Yeah. So, yeah, well, if you guys want to talk about more stories within Phantastes, because there's lots of little encounters in there too.
One story there that I'm absolutely mesmerized by is when he enters this cottage in the Enchanted Wood, where the lady lives with her husband, and there's such a juxtaposition between the two.
Yeah.
Like, this lady says basically that if she wasn't able to see fairies everywhere, she would have died. She basically says, I would be sick if I didn't see fairyland, fairy everywhere.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And her husband is like the opposite of that. He's basically, I see nothing. It's just plain old wood.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. And then he asks Anotis to sort of confirm that. And Anotis like, oh, I don't know really. I've seen those fairies. And they're crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway, but it's just like the whole idea that you have to breathe the air of fairy once in a while. I think Tolkien actually writes about that in his last fairy tale that he writes before his death, which is Smith of Wooden Major.
Yeah.
And he basically, there's a smith that travels to fairy land regularly and brings stuff from there to this world to amaze people. And it's just like a whole lot of that. But just the whole idea that you really become sick unless if you've discovered fairy, you have to go there and breathe that air to remain who you are.
That's interesting. Is it in the book of Acts where that verse says something about it's talking about the churches, or maybe it's in one of the epistles of Paul, where things aren't going quite as as good as they should, and he said, for this reason, some people are sick and some sleep. Do you know that verse?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's in 2 Corinthians. He's talking about 1 Corinthians. He's talking about actually communion. That some people
taking from the cup without
considering Christ's body or something like that.
Well,
and that's why some of you die, basically.
Yeah. So that's even there's some kind of an enchantment in actually understanding what it is that you're doing with the Eucharist, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of fairy there. Like you got to breathe the air of fairy, right, in order so that you don't get sick.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Interesting.
If you don't have enough fairy air in you, you might get sick.
There you go. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. There's also, I have a favorite story in Phantastes of the little girl collecting butterfly wings. Remember that, with the knight? And she asks him to help her because these invisible monsters are knocking her down and walking all over her. And he hits them with his sword, and they appear suddenly to him, and they're all wooden men. And if he hits them with the sword, the pieces that fragment off grow, and so he just makes more of them. So in the end, he has to flip them upside down and stand them on their heads, and then they can't move.
Oh,
that's a really favorite little encounter in Phantastes for me. I find that a very profound story, actually, because I feel like the little girl who's trying to collect butterfly wings. What were you going to say, Ina?
I don't remember this story. Yeah, I'm just rereading Phantastes right now. Okay. Probably it was late in the book.
It is later in the book. It's towards the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 Well, does anybody have any closing thoughts?
Are you asking us or people that are watching?
No, I'm asking you guys.
Oh. Oh, well, I really like one. Well, there's lots of poems in Phantastes, but one has been my absolute favorite, and it kind of sums up, the whole journey of Anotis from, being a teenager, to coming of age. I can't really quote the whole thing, but it's basically toward the end, it's about the king's son who died while battling a giant, but he prevails in the end and chops off his head and brings it and dies at his father's feet. At the father's, he's like a king, I believe his father is, and it's a song of glory. So
And that's a poem written by George MacDonald, or is it?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, because there's some in here that are written by him and some written by other people, right? Like the poem at the beginning of Cosmo's story is also, I love those poems are like little keys to unlock some things in the story sometimes, I find. I saw a ship sailing upon the sea, deeply laden as ship could be, but not so deep as in love I am, for I care not whether I sink or swim. That's kind of what happens to Cosmo, right? And the other one is, but love is such a mystery, I cannot find it out. For when I think I'm best resolved, I then am most in doubt. Yeah, those are like little keys to the rest of the chapter. Yeah.
I'm trying to find.
I also liked it. I also
go ahead.
liked it. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I also liked it when, at the moment when when actually he broke the mirror. So she was laying in that spell, and the ladies who were taking care of her, they discussed how she's being sick with this spell for some time, and usually she doesn't usually and they discussed that she doesn't usually talk when she's in those spells. And here they are sitting near her, and suddenly she starts talking, and the only words she says is Cosmo. So it's just interesting how she called his name at that very moment when he was he was breaking
Breaking.
sorry, he was breaking
It's
the mirror.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It just
Yeah, and then
I
go ahead.
I just thought it was very interesting that she's calling his name.
Yeah.
The moment
Yeah.
when he's in the mirror.
Yeah, somehow she sees him. It feels like, don't you think?
Yeah, maybe she was in the mirror at the moment when he was breaking it. I don't
Or
know.
something. Yeah, like
Yeah.
somehow she has it's a revelation. And then she jumps up and she's perfectly fine and she has to find him and everyone's like, what's happening?
And it was amazing that she even remembered his name, because she just saw him once and then the mirror went to another person, and so, but she still remembered him. I think she felt like this person will be saving me.
He's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She felt
Yeah.
he was really, he really loved her.
Well,
Right.
now I have to read this poem because it really speaks into what Ina just said.
Okay, good.
It's a really
Read it.
short one. Is that
Yeah.
okay? It's a short one. Okay. The king sat on his throne, glowing in gold and red. The crown in his right hand shone, and the gray hairs crowned his head. His only son walks in, and in walls of steel he stands. Make me, O Father, strong to win, with the blessing of holy hands. He knelt before his sire, who blessed him with feeble smile. His eyes shone out with a kingly fire, but his old lips quivered the while. Go to the fight, my son, bring back the giant's head, and the crown with which my brows have done shall glitter on thine instead. My father, I seek no crowns, but unspoken praise from thee. For thy people's good and thy renown, I will die to set them free. The king sat down and waited there, and rose not night nor day, till a sound of shouting filled the air, and cries of a sore dismay. Then Like a king he sat once more, with a crown upon his head, and up to the throne the people bore a mighty giant dead. And up to the throne the people bore a pale and lifeless boy. The king rose up like a prophet of yore, in a lofty death-like joy. He put the crown on the chilly brow. Thou shouldst have reigned with me, but death is the king of both, and now I go to obey with thee. Surely some good in me there lay, to beget the noble one. The old man smiled like a winter day, and fell beside his son. O lady, thy lover is dead, they cried. He is dead, but hath slain the foe. He hath left his name to be magnified in a song of wonder and woe. Alas, I am well repaid, said she, with a pain that stings like joy. For I feared from his tenderness to me that he was but a feeble boy. Now I shall hold my head on high, the queen among my kind. If ye hear a sound, 'tis only a sigh for a glory left behind.
Mm.
So it's almost like it's that lady from the mirror
Yes, it does. Yeah, and the scene,
bemoaning the death of Cosmo to
right?
me.
Yeah,
So
exactly. But that's the story that he's always telling, right? He's always talking. I mean, he's first of all, he's a romantic, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. Like he's literally from the Romantic period. Right. And so he's often talking about this relationship to the divine feminine, whether it's like from the Romantic poet age, the earth itself, right? As the bride, the church. I mean, they're all kind of you can't really tell who's who, in a lot of the stories. And so I think for MacDonald, as for the other romantics, you're always going to be running into this the guy goes out, the St. George story, right? The guy goes out to slay the dragon and save the princess. But that is the marriage supper of the Lamb, right? That is the story. Like I often say this here in this little corner of the internet, that this is the story that we're in. It begins with a marriage, and it ends with a marriage. Right? It's a story of true love, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Grizz is asking, so why did he die? We're all wondering that. He had to.
Yes.
He had to be. Well, he did say, I wonder if that ties in actually. He did say, I'm not going to wait to be willing. And then at some point he actually became willing, didn't he? And he went out like to really find the mirror and break it. So we don't know how he died. Like I honestly thought that it was von Steinwald that killed him. And then I was surprised when I got to the story again that it didn't say anything about who killed him. I was like,
no,
wait.
he doesn't say that. That's why I thought at first that it was just the curse of the mirror that killed him when he broke it. But then this idea of this guy killing him really ties in pretty well.
Yeah, he's getting into his house. He's breaking his precious mirror.
And they were both really good swordsmen, right? So we don't know, Grizz. It's up in the air. It's up for interpretation. Yeah. What does he say here? I've only heard the story once. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's up for interpretation, right? Which is how the scriptures are. and stories and fairy tales and all the rest of it. So
Yes.
yeah. Well,
Well,
unfortunately,
I
I'm not.
like the mystery part of it. I mean, it's this is a mystery, and it speaks more to me. It speaks volumes to me,
Yeah,
as opposed to something ends in a big fat dot. It's not
it's
as
not
fulfilling.
not interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's why all the movies don't interest me anymore.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah. No, yeah. Say more about that, about mystery, Yevgeny. Like, what is it exactly do you think that is necessary about mystery?
Oh, yeah. I actually like Chesterton's quote about. I don't know where he said that, but uh, somewhere he says that the reason he prefers to leave all his stories with an ellipsis, 3 dots at the end, is because when you end with a dot, you really bring a closure to something that shouldn't be closed
Mm,
and or can't be closed without turning it into a little idol, without
mm,
closing the gestalt
mm.
unnecessarily. Whereas if you leave it on the ellipsis, put the ellipsis at the end, then you actually do justice to what you've just been discussing.
Oh, wow.
Because
Love
there's an
that.
open end. And it ties into the whole idea of the uh, darkness that we talked about in the beginning. That darkness is the ultimate hiddenness of God, like in
Mhm.
Dionysius or Areopagite. That whatever we say of God apathetically doesn't do justice to who He is,
Right.
and we really have to become as silent as possible to even begin to contemplate some things that are revealed in good time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I'm not sure what Grizz means. The one famous for the mystery fence?
No, G.K. Chesterton is. I'm not sure if he wrote
I don't
about
know what he
mystery
means by
fence.
that either. But yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, George MacDonald I think it's one of his essays on the imagination, he says, "Do words have" oh, no, it's not. It's in a sermon that he preached somewhere once. "Do words have length? Do they have breadth?" Right? Why would you think that they don't have depth?
Hmm.
And I love that because to me that is the mystery, right? Like the mystery just goes, it never stops going down. It's not like you ever actually reach the bottom. That's what mystery is. It's not solvable, but it's not undiscoverable either. You know? Like you can go down into the layers, you can go down into the depths, but you're just going to keep going down. And and George MacDonald also refers to words as live things,
Mhm.
like that they're actually alive.
mhm.
Have you guys read The Wise Woman by any chance?
No,
Is it
That's another good one.
McDonald's?
Yeah, George MacDonald, The
Oh,
Wise Woman.
no,
I
I
started reading
haven't
The
heard.
Golden Key because you recommended it, but I
Oh,
haven't gotten through yet. Yeah, it's
yeah,
really
it's
intriguing.
really, really good. Yeah. There's too many good ones. The Wise Woman I found really, really, really good. Um, do you know the guy? I'm trying to think of his name now. The guy that wrote The Shack, Paul Young.
Yeah,
Paul Young.
William
He's a
Paul Young.
very
Yeah.
he loves McDonald. Like he talks McDonald all the time. And it never crossed my mind until I read a few of McDonald's stories where God is often portrayed as a woman. That's where Paul Young got the idea to
Oh, that's
in
where
The
you got
Shack.
it. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it is so appropriate in The Shack that God appears to him as a woman because he needed that gentleness so much. The main hero, the main
Right.
character,
Yeah.
and Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's actually one of my favorite stories of all time. You know, The Shack.
The Shack. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really well done story. But yeah, the wise woman, there's and God often and MacDonald in the Golden Key, you'll discover too, will portray God as a child.
Mm.
Yeah, as well.
Which
Because
is
in
true,
his
literally.
sermon, well, in his sermon, Child in the Midst, which is the very first sermon in his series, Unspoken Sermons, he uses the verse of when Jesus takes a little child and puts it on his knee, and then he says, "Except you be like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven," right?
Mhm.
And but then, this is just so George MacDonald. He takes you on this little ride about the child and descriptive. He's all descriptive about what a child is, what a good child is, what a bad child is. What would be so interesting about the child? And then he says, but the reason is because God is like the child.
Mhm.
And it's so unexpected, because you think, oh, well, God loves little children, doesn't he? Like that's why you have to be a little child to get in. No, it's because God's actually like the child. He's singular, and he's simple in his love for us.
Mhm.
And that's how he describes children, right? Just completely singular and simple in their love for their parents.
Mhm.
So, I mean, he gets into other things too in that sermon, but yeah. And so if you're familiar with the Unspoken Sermons and then you read his fairy tales, you'll see the theology woven all through,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
it's really worth the trip.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
and it
thank
isn't
you, by
trip.
the way, for reading them online. I mean, I've listened to a couple of sermons,
Hmm,
so
yeah,
yeah, I'm intrigued.
yeah. There's
I may have
some that
read.
there's some that I just can't keep it zipped. I'm like, I really want people to hear these, and so maybe some people will listen to them if I read them online.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Gris says here, Chesterton's fence is a philosophical concept coined by G.K. Chesterton. So
I'll have to read up on that. I never heard of that.
yeah, I don't know what that means either. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna close this out now. I have to run and do chores, and as you can see now, it's pitch dark out here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's been pitch dark for a while here.
Yeah, you're ahead of me.
Yeah.
But this has been really wonderful. And if you guys want to talk about more stuff, more Phantastes stuff,
Yeah.
I would love to, because for me, it's a never ending deep dive, getting
Do you
into
guys
George.
want to read Smith of Wooden Major? It's a relatively
I
short
have
story
it.
by Tolkien,
I
and
have
it's
it.
the last one. Yeah,
I'll read it. I'll read
I'd
it.
love to reread it and discuss it,
Okay.
because yeah, I've heard one Russian lady actually who gave quite a bit of a lecture on it, and it seems like it's Tolkien's final message. He didn't write anything after that.
Okay.
So a couple
Okay.
of years.
I'm not much of it. I don't know hardly anything about Tolkien. I mean, I read all the, the Lord of the Rings and everything, The Hobbit, and some of the Silmarillion, but I haven't really. I don't know much about him, but you do, so you can. But I'll totally
Yes.
read that book. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's keep in touch about that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well,
Cool.
thanks for Sherry for inviting us. It's really
It was really
treat.
fun. It was wonderful to meet you, Ina. Really, and yeah, and yeah. So I'm gonna sign off now, and thanks everybody for watching. Now have a good night.